Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions at Exostar, and I'll be today's presenter. I am going to give a couple minutes for people who might be running a little late a chance to join. So please bear with me, and we're going to go ahead and start the meeting at 2 minutes past the hour. Thanks so much. Hello again, everybody. For those of you who may have just joined us and were wondering why it was so quiet, I am going to give one more minute for people who might be running a little late a chance to join up. So I appreciate you coming today and appreciate your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started in 1 minute at 2 minutes past the hour. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, thanks for joining me today. And thanks for coming to discuss how to securely collaborate with your partners across the defense industrial base. Before I get started, just want to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. A couple of you did submit some questions prior to today's session, so I've got those on a slide at the end that I'll cover. If we still have some time, I'll also then go to the Q&A and see if there are some there that I can answer as well. So as we go through, if you do have questions, if you want to type them into the question and answer area, I'll get to those as I can at the end. If for some reason we do have an outage during today's session, just wait for a minute and refresh the page. You can also use that link you receive via email at any time. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library anytime after today's event. That'll be found at www.exostar.com/resources. You'll also be receiving an email follow-up of today's webinar. That will include both a link to the recording as well as a PDF version of the slides that I'm going to be using to present today. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, you can reach out to us at our website at www.exostar.com. On there, you'll find a live chat feature on every page, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions you might have via that channel as well. So my name is Kevin Hancock. I'm Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and I'll be running today's presentation. This is the agenda I'll be covering. Today's session does include a demonstration of the Exostar solution. That solution is called Exostar Managed Microsoft 365. So today's session is all about how do I collaborate with my partners across the defense industrial base. Now, in today's world, right, we often need to innovate and work more closely together with our business partners. We need to bring them under our umbrella. We need to work more closely with them. And so how do we do that in a highly regulated environment like the defense industrial base? There are some things we need to think about when we work with a third party. We need to make sure we have the right agreements in place that allow us to share the information and how we share that information is typically part of that agreement. We'll typically want procedures and tools in place that allow us to collaborate successfully. And as all of us know, we have collaboration tools today that we're using internally. So how do we govern and administrate those tools where we're going to share information externally? As we start to do this, we need to think about, well, how do I know that the individuals that I'm inviting from that partner are actually working for that partner? How do I know that the partner is enforcing things like multi-factor authentication, the checks and background checks that we might require as part of our agreements with them, etc. Also, how can I do this in a manner that fits the business need? I don't always want to have to go through an IT organization, set up an account, set up a system for things that they're not necessarily going to need, but how can I quickly and easily add them into our collaboration infrastructure, start working together, get them working successfully together, and how can I stop working with them when we're done? And then how do I ensure that information protection is in place to ensure that they only get to see that information that they should have access to as part of our partnership, that we're not bleeding any information over that might be part of another project or another team, and that it's only that information that is fits the purpose for our particular business together. And that's what I'm going to hopefully be able to show you how you can do that with Exostar solutions. So as we talk about collaborating and working together across the defense industrial base, there's a number of compliance requirements out there. The big one over the last few years have been the CMMC requirements. This is requirements around how do I share controlled unclassified information with others, either that are my subcontractors or that I've received because I'm subcontracting with somebody. Hopefully, as many of you know, there are 3 levels of CMMC, level 1, 2, and 3. Now, when you're talking about controlled unclassified information, you're really talking about that level 2 area where we're going to receive information or create information that we're then going to classify as CUI, controlled unclassified information. And because we have that information, we need to ensure that wherever we store, process, or transmit that information is in compliance with NIST 800-171. There are other concerns out there as well in this space. There's ITAR regulations. There's EAR regulations. These are those international trade of arms regulations. There's requirements that you can't share this with foreign individuals. And as a company, we may have our own internal markings, right? We may mark our own documents, confidential, proprietary, etc. And we have our own requirements if we're going to share that information with third parties. They typically will have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and there may be other requirements as well. If it's proprietary or confidential enough, we may not want to share that at all externally. And now, how do we allow that to happen and still allow our partnerships to work closely together? Now, as many of you may remember, and I'm older, so I remember the old days when we had these things called intranets and extranets. Intranets was where the company itself worked. These are those typical collaboration tools that have grown up over the years that allowed us as a business to more easily share information amongst ourselves. In many cases, companies also had an external facing thing. It often was, it started with their website, but it may also have included things like a partner portal where people could come in and register themselves as a partner to your organization. It's our social media accounts where we're pushing out information to our supporters, our customers, suppliers, friends of the family, etc. But we also may want to do that more in-depth collaboration. And this is also those things that are typically done on what we used to call an extranet. And then we may also engage with third parties to do some customer development. Now, this has evolved over time, right? Now, many of us are using things like Teams, where we can actually invite third parties to work with us directly in that environment. However, that brings our own concerns, right? If I'm going to share, how do I know I'm sharing with the right people? How do I know that this thing isn't going to be picked up and transferred somewhere else? So we have more requirements when we're working with those third parties. Obviously, when we're working with internal folks, we know that they've already gone through our requirements of our business, but we don't necessarily have all those same assurances with those third parties. So what Microsoft and the ND Isaac has recommended is that people consider setting up what's called a meet me tenant. A meet me tenant is really that concept of an extranet. It is, in Microsoft parlance, if you're familiar with Microsoft Teams and M365, it's establishing a second tenant. So you have a tenant for your internal users. You set up this third-party tenant, and that's where you're going to do that third-party work. This Meet Me tenant typically has its own identity provider. Exostar itself is an identity provider that is authorized to work with Microsoft in its GCC high environment. So that identity provider, no matter who it is, whether it's Microsoft Entra or somebody like Exostar, that thing is what's managing the user identities that you're allowing access into, in this case, that Meet Me tenant, right? You're going to use your own identities to get into your corporate tenant. You're going to use, typically in this setup, a Microsoft Azure B2B connection to connect your Microsoft Entra to this third party or this external tenant's identity. And then you're going to enforce that also on your third parties. They're going to come in, they're going to register, they're going to create a username, password. It's going to enforce multi-factor authentication, all those kinds of things. And then they're going to get access to this Meet Me tenant. Now, what Exostar has done with our solutions is we've tried to lower that barrier of entry. What we've set up is a completely managed service, everything from that identity management to actually setting up that Teams environment and managing that for our customers, configuring it, etc., to allow you this Meet Me tenant to share that information that is sensitive in many different ways, whether that be CUI, ITAR, etc. It's that place where you can securely collaborate with those third parties. So Exostar, if you will, extends that Meet Me tenant. So, right, we set up a standalone tenant for our customers. We link that to Exostar's identity and access management solution. Many of you may be using this today. It's what many of you may be familiar with as our managed access gateway. This is what you may be using today to work with, say, Lockheed or Boeing or other prime contractors out there on various supply chain collaboration tools, whether that's working around POs, submitting invoices, etc. So we extend our Meet Me tenant, this external tenant, and we connect in Exostar's identity management solution. We also wrap in additional governance. So we ensure that this entire tenant is set up by a deny by default rule. What that means is, once a company acquires this solution from Exostar, Exostar turns over management of that tenant, but it's just management at kind of the user and team creation level. Exostar manages the overall tenant. Exostar tech ops and support teams are there in place to get you working quickly and easily. They're monitoring the tenant, etc. But you have a role in the tenant which allows you to easily invite others in, create those team spaces, and people are only going to get access to the tenant once you invite them in. They're only going to get access to those teams that you specifically invite them in, and they're only going to work in those spaces. What we're also going to do is put those additional enterprise information protection, because this is a standalone tenant that Exostar configures on your behalf. We can put additional rules and configurations in place around the tenant, like labeling and purview, or using things like Microsoft Cloud Apps or Defender for Cloud Apps to wrap around additional concerns around no downloading or watermarking things if you do download them, or requiring additional authentication in once you've brought those things down. Those kinds of controls in place to meet not only the government requirements or other compliance requirements that you may have, but also your own individual corporate requirements as well. This, connects to the overall Exostar platform. That Exostar platform today manages over 150,000 organizations across the defense industrial base. There's more than 1 million users already in that community or that network of organizations that are working across the defense industrial base. What that means is it's an easy on-ramp into this solution as you want to work with those other organizations. What we typically see is when we engage with a new customer, somewhere between 50 to 70% of the organizations they want to collaborate with are already part of the Exostar community. So when you look up a user, you're going to find that a lot of them are already in Exostar. And so it's an easy click to get them added into the environment, get them access to a particular team, and business users can do this without having to involve their IT organization. And I'll show you this all as part of the demonstration itself. Now, this solution that I'm going to talk about, Exostar's Managed Microsoft 365, consists of really 3 key components. We've already talked about one of those, our Exostar Managed Access Gateway. That's the thing that's passing user authentication and organization vetting. So when you invite a partner to work with you, Exostar is going to ensure that that partner is not on a denied parties list. They're going to ensure that the user who is invited from that organization is a part of that organization. We're going to then enforce that multi-factor authentication, and we can do a number of different proofing levels of those individuals based on your requirements for your partners and how you want to control that access. They're then going to be invited into a Teams environment. That Teams environment is only going to allow them to access to teams that they've been specifically invited into. And then we're gonna wrap those additional controls around the actual documents and other things that you want to collaborate around. Now, the overall solution is a FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent solution. That meets those CMMC requirements of a cloud service provider that's either storing, processing, or transmitting controlled unclassified information. All of this is offered out as a service by Exostar. It's managed by Exostar's Tech Ops and Exostar support teams. These are US citizens here in the US, so we also meet those ITAR and EAR requirements that you may also have around this particular data. Now, the architecture looks something like this. This is, right, that external tenant, right? That's that external collaboration. Those different functionality that Teams brings to the table, right? So Teams includes not only those spaces and the SharePoint behind it to store those documents that you create. But it also includes the applications themselves. So you can maintain access for your partners there within the browser, and they can actually use those applications within the browser to collaborate with you around those particular documents. They can also do all those other things that you can do within Teams, right? They can do chats. They can give you an IP call. You can set up meetings and things like that directly through the Teams interface. So we're providing you that Teams functionality, but we're providing it external to your corporate tenant. So this is where all the information around that controlled information is going to be done. You will have to move it from your corporate environment into this Meet Me tenant, and that's where you're going to work with your external parties. They're going to be invited by you in. They're going to validate themselves against Exostar, and then they're only going to get access to those team spaces that you've explicitly invited them into. And then those team spaces will be logically separated. So, partner one who you may be working with won't have access to partner two's information. And you can set up these team spaces really however you want. There's an Exostar application embedded within the Teams interface that controls the user invitation, team creation, roles, process. So all of those kinds of logical and physical controls are part of the setup of the tenant. And then when you grant users access, they only see those things that they're supposed to see. What we've also done with this Exostar application is created a couple key features that allow you to more easily bring information into or provide information or provide a way for your partners to send information into you. So this one feature we have is called compliant file drop. This allows you to create a mailbox within a team space. Excuse me 1 minute. This allows you to create an email in a team space, which allows people to email information into the tenant. Different roles can then have access to that mailbox within that team space. Excuse me. They can then decide whether or not to keep that information there, share out with others, move it to other teams, etc. But as those files come into the system, that's when they'll be checked for malware, ransomware, viruses, etc. And actually, any file you bring into that into the team's environment will go through those same checks. There's a similar feature to send information out of the tenant. So you can right-click on a document in the SharePoint view. You can send and share those files externally. And then we also have a new feature that we just developed, which blocks download of an entire team space for any user of that team space. So if you've got a partner that you're working with and you really just want them to view documents or edit those documents and you want to make sure they edit them there in their browser in the team space, we have that setting at a per team level as well. Now, the other thing that this solution includes is Exostar's SOC and NOC, right? Our security operations and our network operations center. This is part of the overall service. This is where the solution is monitored. It's where the logs are monitored to ensure no bad behavior is taking place. And if bad behavior does take place, it's checked, it's verified, it's if you will, investigated. You're involved in that investigation. If necessary, we report those things to the necessary government organizations that we're required to as part of the different regulations that we follow and require. So let me dive into the solution itself to show you how this works. Now, this is going to be accessed via your web browser. So this is the Exostar Managed Microsoft 365 solution. And I'm logged in as Adam Spark. Adam Spark is with a company called Glory Minerals. Glory Minerals is the Exostar customer, and Adam Spark is the admin of Glory Minerals for this environment. What that allows Adam to do is, he's the person from Glory Minerals who can create teams, invite users, and manage this environment for Glory Minerals. And then Exostar manages, again, kind of the back end, right? The monitoring, the setup, configuration of the tenant, etc. Now, it doesn't have to be just one person, right? Adam can go into the administration, right? And we're using this Exostar application that's embedded here within the Teams interface. Adam can do those things you'd kind of expect admins to do, right? He can look up users that he may want to find out if they're part of a team. So he's looking up Emma Jackson. Emma Jackson is from a partner company, Granger Systems, and she's got access to some teams here in the environment. Now, maybe Emma is no longer part of the partnership, so Adam could go ahead and delete her. Now, Exostar will manage the life cycle of this identity. So, if Emma, leaves Granger Systems, her account will time out without anybody doing any intervention. Now, Granger Systems has an admin within Exostar, so they could remove them. But if they don't remove Emma when she leaves the company, after 30 days of her not using her Emma.Jackson at Granger Systems email, it'll go to a suspended mode. After another number of days, it'll go ahead and be deleted from Exostar, and then Emma, that account would no longer have access to this system as well. Now, Adam can also add in other sponsor administrators, right? He doesn't want to be the only one from Glory Minerals with access, so he's also created an account for Catalina, and Catalina can assist in the overall administration of this tenant. Adam can also invite those third parties. So we have that ability to add partner domains. And you can add partner domains to come in from a couple of different sources. If you know your partner has a Microsoft GCC high tenant themselves, and you have a trust relationship with that partner, so right, all your agreements require them to do all the things you want of any partner, you trust that third party, you can set up this partner domain with an Azure B2B connection. So they just come in using their corporate credentials. You can also ask them to come through Exostar. And what we do is, as part of the intake in this, we would ask you to give us a whitelist of all those organizations you have trust relationships with. And then when you add them here, right, at exostar.com, add partner domain, then the system itself would know to either add that partner domain from Exostar or from Azure. As you can see, we've got a number of partners, and those partners are coming in from different avenues. This can include social domains. So, if you've got some people using Gmail, if you've got companies out there that aren't in Azure, right, this is when you want to start using things like Exostar to manage those identities and manage the life cycle around those individuals getting access to this particular application or other applications that you might have as well. You've got the ability here to manage licenses. We can delete teams. We can also restore those teams, or you can put these teams in an archive. You got kind of two deletion options. You can archive the team, which means it'll stay here and you can restore it, or you can go ahead and hard delete those teams, which means everything in there will be wiped out. The information will be cleansed from the system and go through those required purging mechanisms to ensure they meet the DoD standard of data cleansing. We can also get reports out of the system as administrator, right? So we may want to know what a particular user did. We may want to know what a particular team or space has done, or we may want a full audit report of the system itself. So we can generate this report. This will give us a CSV file of all actions that took place around this tenant over the last 7 days. Now we had Thanksgiving last week, so not a whole lot is going on in this space right now. But the main thing that Adam will be doing in this space is he'll be the person who creates teams and then determines at least those initial users in that team space. And now this is a process that the request of a team being set up is typically done outside of Exostar. You may have a corporate ticketing system today where you ask, you submit requests to your IT organization or others. That would come to Adam. Adam would be the person who actioned that particular ticket. So in this case, Adam got a ticket to set up a new project team. It's, we're coming up on the Christmas season, so we're going to call it Kringle. And this is going to be a 12-month project we have with a partner. And we're going to go ahead and create this team. Now, when this team is initially created, only Adam's going to have access to it, right? No one else will see that this team exists until they've actually been invited into that team space. And we can invite individual users, or we can invite a list of users. And when we invite them, we can give them particular roles. And this is another thing that's done here within the Exostar app that's embedded within the team system. There's kind of 3 roles that are available for users. We've already talked about the sponsor admin role, right? That's Adam and Catalina who manage the overall system. But you can also have a team manager role. So that team's been created. That team manager role is the one who could then manage that overall team space. So I've got a list of users here. I'm going to go ahead and invite these users into that Kringle project that I just created. I'm going to put that space in, and then I'm going to go ahead and look up these users. I'm using that, when I added those different domains are telling the system where to look up those different users. One of those domains, Yahoo, hasn't been added, right? Adam hasn't allowed users from Yahoo access to the system. If he wants to, he can go in to the admin section and add that social domain in. Or he could let the user who requested to know that, we don't allow that domain access to our systems. There are some users who already have access to this environment. And some of those people are from Glory Minerals. And so they can be added as that team manager role. So Adam's going to make Maya the team manager of this particular space. And then there are some users who, even though they are from partner organizations or even from our own organization, who don't yet have accounts set up in Exostar. And in this case, Glory Minerals is coming through Exostar. So in these cases, they need to get invited in, but they're going to get invited to first create their Exostar account. Then when they get into Exostar, they'll see that they have access to Manage Microsoft 365. They'll click on that app. Once they get into the app, then they'll see that they have rights to individual team spaces. And in this case, right, Dury and Flynn would see that they have access to the Kringle team, and they can get to work with their team members to fulfill that particular commitment that we have. Now, the work itself is going to get done there in the individual team spaces. So all these invitations have been sent, and those users can now come in. When they come in, they'll see that there's a Kringle project, and then they'll be able to dive in and start work within that space. Now, there isn't any information yet here, but we have sent in some information. So as you remember, we've got this feature called compliant file drop, which allows me to send in information. So Glory Minerals has a project called CUI Inbox. In that space, they've created a mailbox for that CUI inbox. So again, I'm using that Exostar application. I'm going into that CUI inbox project or team space, and I'm going into the file drop inbox. Before this meeting started, I went to, my Outlook on my laptop from kevin.hancock at exostar.com, and I sent the necessary information for Project Kringle to get started. This came into the file drop inbox for the CUI team space. I can now view the information here, right? This is the email that I sent in. These are the files that were attached to it. And then I can export this information to the team space. Now, when I say export to team here, it's going to go to that CUI inbox team space. But once it's there, I can then move those files to where I can share them with other team members, or I can delete them, right? You see a bunch of PNG files. That's because my signature block has images embedded within it. So those files still come in, right? They're virus checked, they're malware checked, etc. I can then see that these files show up in SharePoint, right? So you see them here. I can go ahead and delete those image files because we don't really need, the Twitter image and things like that. I can then take this other information that was part of it, and I can move it to that Kringle project. So I can move to, I can go more places. Hopefully the SharePoint site was set up for Kringle. There it is. And I can move those files into that project. Now they're going to, you'll see them disappear from here, and then they'll have moved over to that other space. There, I go to the team space, and I go into that Kringle project, files. Hopefully it show up. There may still be some. Yeah, I was afraid of that. There's still some creation of the SharePoint space going on, so that's why we don't quite see them yet. But what we can also do is go. Let me go to a project that actually has some information already in there, right? Because what we can also do, because this is Teams, and because we've got the applications embedded in here, we can also work on documents directly in here. So if I open up this particular document, just click on it, it's going to open it up in Word here in my web browser. So again, we're keeping all the information here within the enclave. We're not bringing it down to our environment. If I then, close this out and I go back to that team space, this will update that I've changed that file just a few seconds ago. And if somebody else from the team was working on that file, I'd see that they were in there. If I wanted to send them a post, send them a message, etc., I can do that as well. So we're providing you that Teams environment, but Exostar is managing the overall tenant. We've embedded this Exostar application, and that's where we're enforcing the various roles, permissions, creation of teams, etc., that allow you to keep control of that information and allow you to maintain compliance with those various requirements that the defense industrial base requires. So hopefully what you saw was the Exostar solution that provides you that compliant environment to collaborate securely with your partners across the defense industrial base. It's built on top of the Teams platform because that's an easy to use collaboration tool that many of us are familiar with and really leads the market in collaboration tool. It isn't all just about document collaboration, though that's the easiest thing to illustrate. It does also allow you those ad hoc conversations around posts and chats. There is an interface to allow you to create meetings for users there within the enclave. We can enforce that identity validation through Exostar itself. So not only will we vet organizations, but we'll also do vetting of users. At a minimum, we'll typically require a multi-factor authentication, but you can put additional requirements on credentialing of the individuals and the organizations that you want to allow in. As part of Exostar's platform, we provide vetting of organizations. You can send them things like cybersecurity questionnaires and things like that to ensure the organization meets your requirements before you collaborate with them. You can then credential the individual users, do identity proofing around those individuals, and provide different kinds of credentials before you let them in. All of these then meet those different compliance requirements that we've talked about for the defense industrial base, those CMMC requirements, those ITAR, those no foreign, etc. Now, if you do need some additional assistance around CMMC requirements, Exostar has a number of solutions around there. It can all be based on Exostar's managed Microsoft 365. That's that place where you can store, process, or transmit that controlled unclassified information. We have two other applications that will help you create that system security plan based on NIST 800-171 around how you enforce those different controls around not only your enclave, but your organization. And if you need a third party to assist you or actually do that compliance check or to get that certification that you require with, once CMMC is in effect, Exostar has a number of partners that you can engage both directly through our tools, but also through Exostar itself to engage with them to either help you with a particular control or to get you compliant to meet your particular needs. Now, I am going to ask you if you would take the time to fill out a poll while I answer some questions. I'm going to ask my companion that's on the call, Doe, to go ahead and kick off that poll. And then I'm going to answer some questions that came in prior to today's session. So we got 5 questions that came in. So the first one, most managed detection and response, MDR services, uses enterprise service, are for 24/7. Many of those kinds of services utilize overseas teams as part of that SOC. Does this make them compliant for CMMC? If they are non-compliant, are there US-based MDR services? Or compliant MDR solution approved by DIBCAC? So I'll answer the last part of that question first. There are no DIBCAC approved MDR solutions. And managed detection and response solutions don't typically store, process, or transmit CUI. They typically are set up to monitor those systems that do, but they themselves don't have access to the controlled unclassified information. They'll have access to logs, but that's not the same as the information itself. But if you want to ensure that an MDR is compliant, you'd probably want to start to look for those that are in the FedRAMP marketplace or those that say they are FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent. Now, FedRAMP and FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent, right? 2 different things, but they're both okay for CMMC compliance requirements. Now, as I mentioned before, MDR solutions are typically not involved in the storage, process, or transmission of CUI. So those solutions don't necessarily have to be FedRAMP, but you may get a different feedback from somebody else. So if you want something that is CMMC compliant because you think they do store, process, or transmit CUI, then you'd want one that's FedRAMP or FedRAMP Moderate Equivalent. The other ones, you just want to make sure that they have the right customer base, they're utilized by others, And there are MDRs that are FedRAMP. Now that would be, kind of the one thing that I would look for is either that they work with others in the defense industrial base. You got references from those, that they've been successful in passing the CMMC compliance pieces, or they've gone through a DIBCAC assessment or been part of a company's DIBCAC assessment, because they wouldn't have gone through it, but somebody else may have engaged with them or utilizing with them that have. So for number 2, what's the best way to get a level 1 SPRS score? Now, so there is no scoring of level 1, right? Level 1 is the 15 requirements across. There are 17 controls, but they break down to 15 requirements for level 1. It is a self-attestation that you meet those requirements. So you either meet all of them or you don't, and you won't be able to bid on CMMC requirements that require level 1 until you can attest that you've met those. There is no score per se like in level 2. Right? So for level 2, because level 2 is the same, not the same as, but a level 2 requirement is that you meet the NIST 800-171 R2 standard. There's an assessment guide with a scoring algorithm for each of the different controls. That does not exist for level 1. So there is no SPRS score for level 1. You either attest that you are compliant or you're not. So number 3, pretty straightforward, costs associated with purchasing this product. So the Exostar Managed Microsoft 365 solution that I showed you and that I talked about today has really kind of 2 models. One are for those organizations that are 75 users or less. That is typically utilizing Exostar's SMB tenant. The cost for that solution is approximately $50 per user per year. Or I'm sorry, $50 per user per month per year. Sorry, it's $600 per user for a year. And the other one is our enterprise tenant. An enterprise tenant is based, again, on the number of users. That typically averages out to less than the $50 per user. There are tiered pricing, so I'd really ask that you reach out to us and contact our sales team based on the number of users you're thinking of. It is less than the 50, but it is based on number of users. So it's a tiered pricing model, so they'll be able to answer those questions for you. So what is the best ITAR compliance system, and how can we use our MS365 system instead of buying another storage system? And absolutely, a fair question, right? If you're already using Microsoft and you're already using Microsoft 365 and you want to be ITAR compliant, the one thing you will need to ensure is that your Microsoft 365 is in GCC high. Microsoft's just GCC. So Microsoft's got a chart that says all the different compliance requirements for the different kinds of services and the different government clouds that those correspond to. And for ITAR, because one of the requirements is U.S. citizens in the U.S., it only pertains to GCC high. Now, M365 is a number of different services. So depending on which of the services you're using, you're probably okay if you're in Microsoft GCC high. If you're in commercial, you're not going to get the, you're not going to be you won't be ITAR compliant. So number 5, in an organization, can some of the users use a normal email system account and others use a secured email system as long as CUI is not shared? Can an enclave be set up by the customer for CUI on the customer premise? And if so, what are the steps involved to make sure it is certifiable? Now, I really can't answer all the things that go into set up an enclave on premise. Because really, the standard out there is the NIST 800-171. There are 110 controls that you'll need to have implemented around those systems that you have on premise to secure, process, or transmit that CUI. So you can certainly do it, absolutely. And people have been doing it for years. So yes, you can do that, but I can't tell you all the steps that are involved. On the first part of the question, in an organization, can some of the users use a normal email system account and others use secure email as long as the CUI is not shared? Yes, absolutely. Remember, when you create your system security plan, you as the organization define the system where CUI is stored, processed, and transmitted. Now, the kind of the first step to do that is to create a data flow diagram. Understand how CUI enters your system, who or what roles in your organization are involved with that CUI, what tools and systems they use to store, process, or transmit it, and then how that CUI exits your system. That data flow and the systems and people that it touches will inform you on your network diagram or your system for CUI in your organization. And that boundary around those things will be your system security plan and how you implement those NIST 800-171 controls across that overall system. So those are all the questions we got in. Let me just let me stop sharing, and I will jump to the Q&A area to see if there's anything I missed. So do those you invite to use this platform have to also pay to use it? Lisa, yes, they do. It is a fee per user, and those are named user accounts in the system. Now you get to manage those, so you can move people in and out as needed. So you basically get to manage that as part of that overall flow. So it sounds like if I have worked with 365 and Teams before, this will function the same way with the added security protocols for defense contract environments. Yes, that is correct. So this works just like Teams. It's accessed via your browser. All the actions are done within that browser, including the use of the individual applications. What that is doing is keeping everything there in the enclave and ensuring that those controls that are in place aren't broken, if you will. Do we need to have Azure GCC High aside from Exostar Policy Pro Certification Assistant and Exostar Managed O365? The answer is no. So this system can be in place of standing up your own GCC High environment. But it's not necessarily a replacement for MS 365. Right? This is a place to store, process, and transmit CUI. It's not an email system, and it's not a management of your endpoints and things like that. It's where those people in your organization that are involved in CUI are going to do their work. So I think I answered the per user question. And that looks like it for the questions. So everyone, I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today. As I mentioned, you will get a recording, a link to a recording of the webinar, as well as the slides I used. Thanks again for joining me today, and have a great rest of the day. Take care.